My name's Nina. I'm a Spanish student here at Western, and I'm also a communications minor. I'm going to be presenting today on a paper that I wrote for my critical media analysis class, and the paper is an analysis of the heroic framing of Ernesto Che Guevara as presented in the film Diaries de Motocicleta, or The Motorcycle Diaries. If you don't know who Ernesto Che Guevara is, he is essentially the face of the communist revolution in Latin America. And since then, he has become an icon of revolution all throughout the world. You may have seen him on t-shirts like this one, but the film is not about his work as a communist or a revolutionary. It's actually about his life way before then, when he has about one term left of medical school and he's a kid, and he decides that instead of doing that, he's going to go off on a crazy road trip on a motorcycle with his friend Alberto Granado, and they travel all through South America and eventually end up at the Sao Paulo leper colony. In presenting capitalism through material signs that Ernesto must overcome physically rather than philosophically, the film downplays the Marxist ideology of Guevara and gives the audience a way to sympathize with the emotional distress Ernesto feels in realizing these injustices by displaying his existential distress as physical pain. Essentially, the film presents all of the Marxist ideologies of Guevara through symbols rather than saying them outright, which makes the film more accessible to people who have all different backgrounds and all different opinions regarding economics as well as class and society in general. The first symbol we're going to talk about is the color white. The bourgeoisie is all costumed in the color white, as well as placed into settings that are very white. We see this first with Ernesto's family, as they are all dressed in white and they are sitting in a room that is completely decorated white. We see it again when Ernesto goes to visit his girlfriend. She essentially lives in a white castle. White has a lot of different meanings around the world, but the most common are those of purity, innocence, and peace. It suggests that the bourgeoisie is not part of a system that benefits them because they wish to hurt those who are below them. It is simply because they are existing peacefully within the system and are choosing to not do anything. So they're somewhat ignorant, but not out of malice. Associating the bourgeoisie with innocence also excuses this ignorance that they have. The third meaning of purity suggests that the bourgeoisie are somewhat victims of their own creation. We see this through Ernesto's father. In the beginning of the film, he says to Ernesto that he doesn't want him to drop out of medical school. And then later, right before Ernesto goes, his father comes and says, hey, I too would go off and have this crazy adventure, but I'm too old now. He's been part of this for too long and it's too late for him. The system is something that's victimizing not only the proletariat, but also the bourgeoisie, which excuses the bourgeoisie from taking any responsibility for this division that is hurting the proletariat. And so they are excused from being the villain in the film, and it suggests that the new villain is the ideology of classism itself. The ideology of classism is represented through white collars in the film. White collars, at least in the United States, have come to symbolize those of the highest working class, so the CEOs, the bosses of everyone, that are the blue collars. And so within the film, it sort of perpetuates those meanings, as everyone who wears a white collar is part of the higher class. And by making class something that is simply part of appearance and costuming, it suggests that class itself is something that is easily removable. It's also something shallow and it doesn't exist internally. However, because these things are presented through symbols, this Marxist commentary goes almost unnoticed. If the story isn't about communism versus capitalism, what is this story actually about? The answer is that the story is about Ernesto becoming a bourgeoisie hero, recognizing his privilege and using it to be a nice guy. The story is easy to follow and it feels good to watch, especially if you are part of the dominant class like Ernesto is. There is still conflict in this story, and the conflict is caused by division. However, just like the Marxist commentary, the division is presented through symbols. In this case, that symbol is water. Water almost kills Ernesto 4 times within this film. The first is when their tent is blown into the river. The second is when Ernesto wades into a lake and then catches a cold and almost dies from his severe asthma. And then the third time is when they're on a boat going to the San Pablo leper colony. The fourth time that Ernesto is almost killed. All of these different symbols come together. The scene takes place on Ernesto's birthday, and he is on the doctor's side of the leper colony. The doctors live on one side, and then the Amazon River runs through the middle, and the lepers live on the other side. So the river presents a physical representation of division in the sense that it actually divides the two classes. Ernesto decides that he's going to swim across the Amazon at night in order to see the lepers on his birthday because he wants to, and he puts himself in really great physical danger in doing so, not only because it's a huge river and it's nighttime, but because he is extremely asthmatic and has almost died already in the film. In this scene, Ernesto is actively swimming away from the symbols of the bourgeoisie. He even takes off his own white collared shirt before he swims across. Because the scene is set up so simply where Ernesto has to physically cross something that is causing a divide, is much easier for the audience to watch that and say, Ernesto is doing the right thing in this situation. Essentially, at the end of the film, you can see Ernesto as the only person of all of the bourgeoisie that has decided to recognize that he is privileged and then use his privilege not only to help the lepers but to become their friend. Che Guevara has become an icon of revolution, but he has lost the dimension of humanity, and the character of Ernesto gives those things back to this person by presenting him as selfless and kind and privileged, but recognizing of that. And so that kind of leaves you with a good feeling at the end of the film, but the film's not over. It cuts to a black screen and says, Ernesto Che Guevara was killed by the CIA. And you're kind of just like, what? He did all these great things. What just happened? What is interesting about the film is that it totally creates a separate identity for Che. Makes you forget that Ernesto is even part of Che, never even calls Ernesto Che in the film, and then reminds you of who this person actually was. These two pieces of information that don't seem to go together provoke the audience to go out and read Ernesto Che Guevara's work and try to understand actually what he stood for and make their own decision about whether or not that was right or wrong, and whether or not it was right or wrong for him to be killed for what he did do in his life.